and I'm more than willing. Part of it is going to come out of my pocket anyway. I'd like to be able to give a donation to Freedom Works. They're an absolutely fantastic organization, really trying to get together a whole coalition of groups of people, everybody from Smart Girl Politics and ResistNet and the 912 groups, and really get a coalition going so we can become, the new move on for the right, because that's what we have to do in order to take our country back. So thank you everybody for coming here today, and I hope you have a great time.
Hi everyone, my name is Lloyd Duhan. I'm a resident of Cape Coral, business owner here. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is just an absolute scholar of the Constitution. He is a former judge in Oklahoma. He is a combat veteran in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served as a lieutenant colonel in Iraq and Afghanistan, and took care of our troops. He was an infantry commander. It is with great honor and my pleasure to introduce Mr. Mike Chanopolis.
Thank you. Glad to see there was a sign here, reclaim our Constitution, right? And that's one of the things I'm here to talk about today. But first, before we can really understand the Constitution, we need to understand the bedrock upon which it was laid. And that is biblical law. All of the law that we have today comes from biblical law, no matter where you look at it, okay? For instance, we have covenants not to compete in business, right, Lloyd? And what that is a negative contractual covenant, just like the Ten Commandments. It's a covenant between God and his people. Thou shalt not do certain things. We have that in business today. That is the basis of our civil law. The Constitution is no different, except for the Constitution in the United States was the first time ever in 4,000 years of recorded history that a nation actually decided to base its law and its government on biblical principles. And that's why we have been so successful. The reason that we're not so successful is we drifted away from that. And I'm going to explain that to you here about the Constitution. The Constitution has 7 articles, okay? The first article establishes Congress, gives us a bicameral legislation. So we have the House, in which we elect popularly by population, and the Senate, 2 senators from every state. Everybody knows this. Then Article 2 establishes the office of president and tells him what his limitations are, okay? We have to remember that the president does not have any power that was not granted to him in the Constitution, okay? The problem that we have with this president is he was never qualified constitutionally to take the office, okay? He wasn't born in the United States. If he was, he would have shown us. Article 3 establishes the courts. Now let's talk about that for a minute, because we have all these horrible decisions out there, like Roe versus Wade. The United States Supreme Court had no authority to make that decision, okay? They have original jurisdiction over 3 types of issues. Issues between the states, issues involving the federal government, including diplomacy and that kind of stuff, okay? And issues based solely upon federal law. That's the only original jurisdiction that the Supreme Court has. Now, they have and all of those actions are filed directly in the Supreme Court. Now, they have appellate jurisdiction, meaning jurisdiction to review cases that percolate from lower courts. But under Article 2, the Congress has the power to appoint and establish all courts below the Supreme Court, okay, as a check and balance. And then Congress has the authority and grants the Supreme Court authority for appellate review. So the Supreme Court has jurisdiction for the 3 things that I talked about. That's original jurisdiction, but only has appellate review that Congress permits it. So when we get a Supreme Court that's out of control because they're appointed for a period of good behavior, which is essentially life, okay? So when we get a Supreme Court that is legislating from the bench, there is a check and balance on that branch of government by the legislature, by Article 1. But we have never had anybody in office with the moral courage to exercise that check and balance. And that's why we are where we are today with the court. The court is absolutely making law out of whole cloth. Okay? How many of you know about the First Amendment issue where the Supreme Court has said, we can't have public prayer in our schools? You hear about that? Well, where does that come from? The doctrine of separation in church and state. Well, show me that in the Constitution. What the First Amendment says is that Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I don't see anything there that says you can't worship in a public place. You can't have the 10 Commandments in a courthouse. But the Supreme Court has twisted that around. Why? Because we've let them, and I'm going to get to that. I'm going to race through the last few articles, okay? I lost my cards here, hang on. Okay. Article 4 is just the full faith and credit clause, meaning that we have to give full faith and credit to laws around the states and among the states, so that if you get married here, you're still going to be married if you move to Texas, okay? Article 5 is about how the Constitution may be amended. Article 6 is about debts. In other words, the debts of the United States will honor debts, even from the Revolutionary War. And Article 7 is how we ratify the Constitution. Now that's really kind of dangerous because it says, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let's go through the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Okay, everybody's heard of the Bill of Rights. Can anybody name the first 10 amendments? Go through them? No, it's kind of scary that we can't. These are our rights. They can't be taken away from us. These are our unalienable rights. Okay? The First Amendment. I talked about Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's exactly what they're doing. They're prohibiting my free exercise of religion when they say that I can't worship in public. Okay? And the right of freedom of the press, the right of free speech, the right of freedom of association, all of those are First Amendment rights. Second Amendment right to bear arms. Anybody hear that? Okay. During the election, there was a sign in Texas, okay, and it said, I had here my sign for McCain. And somebody took it down. They violated my First Amendment right of free speech. And if they come back, they're going to learn what the Second Amendment's about. Okay? The Second Amendment. Do we have the right, this is the age-old dispute, do we have the right to bear arms individually, or do we have the right to bear arms collectively, meaning a militia, a National Guard? Okay? I will tell you that we have the right to bear arms individually, and that right can never be taken away from us. Good. The first 10 amendments, the entire Bill of Rights, is granting individual rights. You just heard me say the First Amendment and list all the rights granted. I'm going to go through the rest of them. They're all individual rights. If we then take the Second Amendment and interpret it to be a collective right, it has no place in the Bill of Rights. It would be someplace else. Okay? Quartering of troops is the Third Amendment. Of course, our founding fathers were concerned, so they never wanted the federal government to be able to force us to house and feed soldiers like England did. Okay? Fourth Amendment is about search and seizure. You cannot search somebody's house without a warrant, and that warrant must be based upon an affidavit of probable cause. Now, when the Bill of Rights was first passed in 1791, it did not impact the states. So the state government didn't have to have a warrant to search your house. So the federal government would go to the state entity and say, you search without a warrant, then I'll prosecute. So when we got to the 14th Amendment, we fixed that. We said all the first 10 amendments now apply to the states too. All right? Search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment, you have the right to a grand jury to indict you before you are actually charged with a crime. So we make sure there's no trumped up charges. You also have the right to a jury trial. What we're seeing there is due process, substantive due process. Okay? And then the Sixth Amendment is procedural due process. You have the right to assistance of counsel. That's been interpreted to mean effective assistance of counsel. Okay? The Seventh Amendment, you have the right to a jury trial in a civil matter worth more than $20. So now we're seeing this whole thought about due process moving from the criminal side to the civil side. Okay?